Hey everybody, it's your favorite West Virginia in space here, and today we're covering the third in the 4 books of the End of the World line, the Robot Uprising book, or Revolt of Machines, I think it was actually called. But it doesn't matter, it's the Robot Uprising book, where machines turn against humanity. You get the idea, so we're gonna jump right in this. Though I must admit, this book is kind of, it's kind of a middling book out of the 4, I'm not gonna lie here. But let's go and start with the first scenario, the Modular Menace. This scenario pretty much starts with the... Actually, it's kind of interesting. Most scenarios in the RPG, the book line, tend to set it up with a, oh, well, then all of a sudden. But this one actually needs a bit of setup. There's these robots called the Modules, and their whole gimmick is that they are little household helpers. They can do all kinds of things, and they get smarter the more than they are together. They can, like, network intelligence. One is pretty stupid on its own, but together they can do a lot more help for you. Like, 3 of them can cook you a gourmet meal and get everything ready for you. And so they kind of spread throughout society, though it does state that places like the military are a lot slower to adopt them for obvious reasons. And it's all going pretty good until a minor software update in the company that makes them makes this small little mistake in that it boosts their intelligence and range of their Wi-Fi communication skills, which apparently is just enough to hit sentience, and it's malevolent sentience, that it wants to kind of ensure its own survival, and also just kind of messed up in a degree, and a little bit bitter about being told what to do by humans, and so they turn against humanity. This is a pretty simple setup as it goes on, and does kind of what you do, until the network robots figure out that together they can form giant robots called Mordlords. That's not trademarked by the company in the universe. And so it kind of goes to destruction as they kind of slowly but surely tear down society and giant robot fights. The world is kind of struggling with how to deal with them, and this goes on until all the Mordlords basically take over society, and then when all the robots basically come together into one networked intelligence, because they're all kind of fine before this, they basically just take over the world and enforce their wishes upon humanity. They don't really want to kill humanity, just keep it in its place and make sure humans don't rule. So they build these massive cities and build things to their own design and liking, and humans basically just live as slaves in this society. You know, with highly efficient, highly regimented. Oh, and also, make sure to oil the joints of your machine overlords. So, that's kind of the scenario. Oh, of course, there's the resistance. And the resistance is resisting the robots. And if I'm going to say this a lot, because I'm going to be saying this a lot. Anyway, so, let's move on. The Modular Menace, its scenario is, well, it has an interest of 3. It's not as generic as Dumb Zombie. So, I guess a bit more going on. And the setup is kind of interesting. And the cities are very fascinating. But overall, it's kind of basic. Survival is a 4. You don't have the best shot of surviving in this scenario due to all the destruction and chaos, and the robots don't really treat you well, the modules. But on the bright side, it's not the worst, mostly due to a lack of stuff like nuclear fire and all that jazz to kill you. And effect is a 4. This is going to sound weird, but I do believe this scenario has a relatively high effect power. Simply put, because there is implications that you can do stuff like maybe build a line of mole droids that doesn't have this weakness in systems that's not being hacked, but turning evil, and there's ways to slow down the production and maybe fight the mole droids, and there's stuff you can do. And also because, well, as a point together, an individual Mordlord isn't that tough, so presumably someone with functioning IQ levels could even help. Heck, even states that some of the mole droids actually don't want to kill humanity or enslave it, they actually want to help them. So if you could help those guys out, then you might actually have a shot. But overall, let's get to some minor points. Dumb robots. I'm sorry, but nothing about these robots is ever going to be cool in my opinion. They're just kind of dumb looking, and I'm not the biggest fan of the premise anyway. It's just not something. When they form together into a giant robot, it's better, but still. And on a plus side, nice cities. I really like how the cities are described. They're cold and feelingness. It feels perfect for these kind of machines. That's just me, though. Overall, it's kind of a middling scenario. If you like it, there's nothing offensive about it in any sense, so you should probably enjoy it if you're into End of the World. So anyway, let's move on. The next scenario is logical conclusions, and this one is one of the 2 Terminator-based scenarios, and we'll get into that when we move on to the next one. Anyway, logical conclusions actually starts with a bit of setup, but not in the same way as the previous one. This one starts up that the U.S. military, or theoretically any government you want, but I'm just going to keep saying it like I said in the scenario, it gets 2 different deals of how to, for the future of warfare. One of them is to build powerful robots that could serve as frontline soldiers, but they're kind of big and a little bit awkward and don't adapt very well to battlefield scenarios. The other one is to build cyborgs, turn humans into cyborgs, that can kind of do the same thing. The government ultimately isn't going to take either offer, as they don't feel either one is particularly good enough or not worth the cost. But as a slight change to the company who's gonna make the cyborgs, makes the offer that they make great intelligence agents due to their covert nature and potential complete loyalty. So they go with that deal and switch it over, instead of the military, over to the NSA and CIA and that kind of thing. And so that goes along. They make the first few batches of cyborgs, and it's going pretty well. They even have some field operations. However, for some reason beyond my understanding, they thought, hey, let's move all form of emotions and human psychology in this thing. And so it's supposedly be 100% loyal. But turns out a little glitch in the brain happens, where then they become super patriotic, but somehow forget everything about America. They want to protect the loyalty of America by converting any true patriots into more cyborgs and killing people who are a bit too uppity. This basically spirals out into a covert project of theirs for several months to convert as many loyal patriots as possible and, kill anyone who poses a direct threat to them. Of course, they're kind of crazy because apparently whoever programmed it didn't do it correctly, so their parameters are a bit strange. Also, they seem to have no idea of any of America's values. And so they kind of lead to the worldwide destruction, take over. Luckily, those guys who are gonna build the more traditional robots do actually have some ready on standby and actually help fight them out. And so this battle goes on for a while. And eventually they make the Mark II robots that can disguise themselves as humans for some reason. And this kind of goes pretty badly, as most of the world ends up in nuclear hellfire when the cyborgs get a hold of the nuclear arsenals of the world. But most of America is okay. Mostly, except for indirect radiation fallout and, of course, cyborg takeover. And then you have, of course, outposts across the world, and the cyborgs have been uploading people who are not quite on either side of the criteria into certain, virtual worlds, some of which are described as weirdly 1950s. And they start upgrading themselves, and it becomes, kind of this Terminator-esque conflict. So, let's go move on from the overall scenario and, talk about the individual points here. Interest is a 5. I love this scenario. It's not quite, I just love it. It's very interesting. In my opinion, it has a good way to make a Terminator-type story without resorting to just copying the Terminator. And I like it. I like the premise of the cyborgs trying to convert people to their cause. You know what I mean? And I just love that. Survival is actually, I'm going to say 2. The nuclear attacks on just across the world wipes out pretty much anything that isn't America for the most part. Not everything, but a lot of it. And even in America, a lot of people die from the conflicts or the fighting, or die because they get turned to cyborgs or get terminated. So your chances of survival aren't terribly high. Although you could argue this is more of a 3, but that's a personal opinion. Effect is a 3. It's very much set up like a war with the resistance, to get used to saying that word. And the resistance is fighting them, and they don't stand the worst chance, especially with the Gladys robots, not the cyborgs, the robots. And so it's actually quite useful, so that you might be able to truly fight it off. Man, let's go into some more minor points. 1, many cool robots. You have the cyborgs and you have the robots, and they're both on two opposite sides, and they're cool, and I love them. The cyborgs I do have a problem with, I'll get to later, but overall the robots are also pretty interesting too, as they're a really cool way to incorporate the whole good robot, bad robot kind of thing from the Terminator movies without just copying it. The robots are a bit more interesting. I don't entirely understand why they have a whole secondary, the second generation can disguise themselves as humans. I don't quite understand the reasoning for it, but that's just me. Another plus, cyborg players, because it's one of the ideas they suggest in the post-apocalypse one is them actually, your player gets captured, but before they can be converted fully into a cyborg, before the brain programming happens, they manage to bust them out, but of course they still have all the other technology, which just is hello, would you like to be a badass? Here's your chance. And of course another plus is with this kind of thing is cool fights. Come on, fighting robots, doing shenanigans like this, it's gonna be great. I mean, you're probably gonna die, but it's gonna be great. I do have one major negative with the scenario. The cyborgs are a bit wonky. The logic seems pretty flawed, and I don't entirely get a lot of it. And then, of course, I have to ask the question of, they're supposed to be perfect stealth infiltrators, but yet all the artwork of them shows them wearing black FBI suits with sunglasses and slicked back hair. Yes, I get it, you're supposed to look like an FBI agent, but for crying out loud, nothing about that screams stealth. Yes, some of the lore in it suggests they can obviously hide better, but the artwork does not show this at all. Dude, I don't know how they hide it all when they can be spotted a mile away. Just look for anyone dressed like that. But anyway, it's still one of my favorite scenarios in the book. But anyway, let's move on to the other scenario. Death from Above is the third scenario in the book and the other Terminator scenario. And I specify Terminator because where the previous scenario was more about like the Terminator, cyborg, robots kind of thing, this more follows the Skynet kind of thing. Basically, similar step to the first one, say it all with me. Basically, the US government has a whole new drone program, building drones that are better than ever before. And for some bizarre reason, they make an AI to coordinate all this called Helios. It's like basically that's the project name of it. And so the idea is that they can control the drones and keep and adapt to battlefield situations. Apparently, of course, it develops sentience and decides, you know what, the best way to minimize casualties in the long run is to take control of the entire Earth via nuclear holocaust. So it does pretty much exactly that. Its setup is it attacks with its drones, first attacking US military bases. Well, first it then seals off its own base, kills on one side, and then starts attacking them on the world to set up a third world war. But then it's like, oh, those are American drones attacking us. And so it sparks World War III as pretty much everybody dogpiles on America except for Canada and England. Thanks for staying with us, bros. But, and so it basically devolves into World War III. The drones, after everyone gets decimated, after weeks of the fighting, eventually hacks into all the nukes of the world, nukes a whole bunch of it, big surprise, and then says, you have to comply with our new orders or you will, basically be nuked again. It stated that pretty much everyone went along this plan except for France, who died like a Giga Chad by getting nuked instead of serving the robots. Total Chad move. But, and so Helios takes over, and it's not actually like the Modular scenario where the Modular completely rebuilt society. Helios in this scenario just controls everything. It monitors everything. You can't have religion or culture or nationality or anything, because that would start a conflict, probably. Maybe, sort of, kind of. And basically everyone's life is complete and utter bad. It just kind of sucks. Of course, there is a way to go up somewhere in society. Serve the AI loyally and rat out your fellow man. And so, of course, say it with me now. The Resistance. Sorry, I get tired of saying that. But, fights them and plans to overthrow Helios and its corrupt AI, and well, it turns into a whole battle of covert espionage, and there's new drone types, and it's a whole thing. So now I've overly explained the scenario. Basically, let's move on to some of the points. Interest is a 3. It's your standard evil AI takes control of the defense systems and takes over the world. There is nothing you haven't seen here before. It doesn't mean it's not necessarily interesting, and some of the post-product stuff is interesting, but fundamentally it is the same thing you've seen before. Heck, it's a bit too similar to Maldroids in the ending, in my opinion. Survival is a 3. Once again, nuclear Armageddon, but this one's slightly less bad because unlike the last scenario where they pretty much nuked everything that was in America, this one, though it nuked everywhere, was a lot less trying to murder everybody. Or just get a point across and crush any resistance, rather than just murder. But still, nuclear nightmare is a nuclear nightmare. Effect is a 6, actually. I'm going to kind of explain why, even if it gets into my little point here, if it doesn't make any sense. But, is that the Helios AI system isn't something that just, gets onto the internet and can't be directly killed. It's not like that. Sure, it hacks into things, but it's never stayed to, infest multiple computer systems to get on the internet. Or, I mean, as it's on the internet, its influence is. Is that actually it's still in one base somewhere in New Mexico. And the fact is, if you were to destroy there, everything would go down with it. So all you have to do is just get there, which I'm sure is heavily defended by drones, but still one location. It gets even worse. You remember that the government knew when they shut down because the drone literally killed everyone inside its base and weren't able to get contact back from it. So I can't imagine how when you're doing that, you wouldn't place some kind of EMP or nuclear device inside the base just in case this kind of thing happens. And this bleeds more into my overall doesn't make sense point, is that the whole idea is that it uses the American drones it has access to for most of the story until later to trick the world into thinking America's attacking everyone, which makes sense until you realize it made the stupid mistake of attacking American military bases first. Very publicly, mind you, for several days. I don't know how any nation on Earth would be able to logically make sense that the Americans were attacking them when those drones were attacking them before. Even if it was just some kind of ploy to think that no one thought it was them, why would you weaken your own military before a conflict? Really, why would you blow up your own troops and military stuff before going to war with the most powerful nations on Earth? I guess Canada and England in this scenario must have had a functioning brain cell and realized that doesn't make any sense. But, let's move on to the positives. Plus, it does do everything with what it has. It's a very basic scenario, and without adding more to it, they were really struggling, in my opinion. And I have to give them credit, it's kind of interesting what they got here. More room to expand, but they really did everything they had with it. Another point is that there's a lot of room for stories. The opening bit, not so much, it's more good for backstories, but there's like cool fights, kind of the resistance, you can be hunted down for filthy resistance members. There's a lot you could do with this, and honestly, I can't, and I like how Healers has a bit of a megalomaniacal streak. But, and of course, action missions. Woo! I love action missions in these games. It always means the scenario is more fun. But anyway, that's it. Let's move on to the next scenario. Heavy Metal is the fourth and second to last scenario in the Robot Uprising book, and I'm not gonna lie here, it's one of my least favorite scenarios in all of the end of the world line. Like, even compared to the zombie ones, okay? I really don't like this one. And so I'm going to explain it to you, and maybe explain why I don't like it. Basically, the premise of this one is, basically, this cosmic kind of radiation that gets into an old Soviet satellite, and the satellite crashes back to Earth and spreads the radiation around. Now, this radiation affects any kind of machine of sufficient complexity, which is a purposely nebulous term of what that actually defines, and it spreads every kind of machine with a sentience, and more importantly, an overwhelming desire to kill humans beyond any form of self-preservation. And you can imagine how poorly this goes when I mean every piece of technology turns against you. Cell phones, cars, lawnmowers, washing machines, garbage disposals, bloody screwdrivers. I'm not sure how a screwdriver turns against you, but apparently a screwdriver can turn against you and basically tries to kill all humans. I don't think I need to even remotely explain how completely and utterly terrifying that is. Well, terrifying if it wasn't so completely stupid, but it's still terrifying if it happened. But long story short, it kind of goes the way you think. Society crumbles pretty much instantly, as it only takes a few days to spread across the world, and people are, well, pretty much forced to go back to the old days. Of course, any tools or traps they make have to make sure it's not sufficiently complex, otherwise, it will turn on you. And it's not easily defined what that is, complexity-wise. And so, people fight over it, and eventually some of the machines get a little bit smarter. Oh, and they all don't need power because the radiation fuels them, so don't think you're gonna run them out of the battery life. Except cars do need fuel, though. Weird. But, and so, society crumbles back to the old days. There are a few scientists who are working on ways to uncontaminate machines, and to kind of get things working again. And so, that's kind of where the scenario leaves off. Okay, let's get to the points. Interest is a 1. I'm sorry, but this scenario is so bloody stupid, I can't take it seriously. I mean, if it happened, it would be terrifying. But I just don't care. I think it's kind of a bad scenario. It breaks down logically. Because, how would you infest things that do not have capacity? Why is something called a machine, but other things not? It's bizarre. But let's move on to survival. Survival is a 1. I'm sorry, but most of us are going to die here because our phone is going to turn against us, and it's going to blast a noise so loud it blows up your brain. Yes, that's an example actually given. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but most of us are dying without the modern conveniences or just modern society and all of them actively trying to kill you. Yeah, most of us, if not all of us, are screwed. Just objectively. Effect is a 2. There isn't much you can do about the radiation unless you just happen to own a spaceship. Or, I guess you're Elon Musk. But, there is stuff you can technically do. It is implied you could scrub the radiation off of something or find a way to make it immune, maybe. And maybe you could try to do something so it's not impossible. It's just extremely unlikely to get to anything done. Okay, let's move on to some minor points in it. It's dumb as heck. I won't go into this. It's dumb. I don't think I need to explain to you how every piece of machinery turning against humanity is dumber than a doorknob. And of course, it doesn't make any sense because how would radiation affect literally everything? It doesn't make any sense, and I'm sorry. I just don't. And I can't, I can't wrap my head around it. I'm sorry. I can't take it too seriously. But there is one positive. Cyborgs, maybe. It's stated that because kind of unfair to players who need a wheelchair or a prosthetic limb if their prosthetic limbs and wheelchairs or pacemakers instantly turned against them, because that would be kind of mean and unfair for them. That those machines that are too close to humans, the natural electrobiotic field, I can't say the name right, but you know what I mean, keeps them from being infected, and that makes sense. Except for one itsy-bitsy tiny problem. How on earth is a wheelchair immune, but not a cell phone that is equal distance to you? And if that means that the electromagnetic field of humankind removes the radiation from it, or keeps them from being infected, then literally the way to deal with most of those machines is to walk up and tap it. Because then your bioelectric field should, by in-universe logic, remove the radiation from it, or at least keep it from working when it's too close to you. So literally, the only way machines could harm you is that they did it from range. Which is still terrifying, but it's also a lot less dangerous because it means that every machine that gets tapped by a human will at least temporarily be immune. Although also maybe leads to a weird loophole you could possibly exploit by merging yourself with technology, you could become that technology would be immune. So becoming cyborgs is a viable option. Someone call the second scenario. Anyway, let's move on to the last scenario. The Nanopocalypse is the last scenario in the book, and it's kind of a gray goo kind of scenario. And it's not exactly hard to imagine from the name. Basically what happens is a research lab in America accidentally creates a nanomachine that's designed to cure cancer and build things and all that jazz. You know how this goes. But they decide, instead of wasting time making more of them, let's design them to auto-make things. So basically it can strip the carbon out of anything at once, and then it can make more of itself. So they release some of those new improved nanomachines into a rat with a tumor, and the robots destroy the tumor, and then they use it to make more nanobots, and then they consume the rat, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, all the lab is gone. And it just keeps spreading everywhere. I do mean literally everywhere. Like, it does not take much time at all before the entire Earth is just consumed by nanobots. Just all over the place, man. Like, they can dissolve through basically anything, and they don't have a solid counter because no one knows what EMP is, I guess. Seriously, I don't recall ever saying why EMPs don't work. But, I could be forgetting something, though. But basically, yeah, it's kind of terrifying because, you know, by the time you start dissolving for the nanobots, you're already dead. And it's actually kind of horrifying, I'm not gonna lie. I mean, it's just objectively watching everything, including humans, people, parts of the ground, dissolve around you is pretty terrifying. And until you realize that logic starts to break down here, but we'll get to that later. But these nanobots do have one major weakness: the cold. It's actually stated that around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, I think, the machines start to suffer serious issues from the cold. They can't replicate as fast and will even stop in sufficiently cold situations. So, if you happen to be moving to Antarctica, or in cold seasons, you're actually immune to them because the machines can't function. So, what little of humanity survives moves to Antarctica, and basically tries to stab shop there. The problem immediately being that, there's a lot of people here, and not a lot of food, or other basic utensils. And all of the rest of the Earth is basically dust now. So, yeah, and there's now massive seas of these robots just waiting for some carbon to show up. It does state that if humanity could wait out the robots, then they could maybe take back the Earth, but there also isn't much to work with, and the robots would not decompose the carbon back in the Earth at any reasonable rate. So, yeah, not a good situation for humanity. I wouldn't say we're outright screwed, but we're certainly close. So, anyway, let's move on to some points. Interest level of the 2. Nanobots and Grey Goo are terrifying. Just objectively, I'm not gonna lie there. It is. Survival is a 1, because, Jack, you're surviving. What do you think of the chances you're going to be one of the few, who knows how many people that gets to Antarctica? You will probably be a random person that dies in the dust. Like me, like everyone you care about, we'll all end up dust, thanks to some random nanobot. And effect is a 1. There's no real confirmed way to deal with these robots in any reasonable sense. The best you could do is hope to kind of wait it out like the Visagist in there from the Alien book. Maybe, although even the Visagist in there gives you hope. Let's move on to the points, okay? Doesn't make any sense. This is actually a bit confusing, but a lot of people talk about the Grey Goo scenario, and objectively, Grey Goo is terrifying. There is a minor problem, though, and that is that any machine that smelts down or converts energy to make more of itself, like smelts down metal into, carbon's a bit different, but same principle, to make more of itself actually solves a problem. You have to heat the metal up or the materials up to get into the right shape. But you're also made of those materials. So a Grey Goo scenario would actually probably fail in real life, at least on a large scale, because fundamentally the nanobots would heat themselves up so hot trying to make more of themselves that they would burn themselves to death. Like, unironically. It's not saying it's impossible to get around this. There are all theoretical ways to do around it, but it's not easy. You know what I mean? And it would definitely slow it down. Also, EMPs exist. I mean, I'm just saying they are an effective weapon against these kind of things, because a machine so small has no real way to armor itself against an EMP-based attack, or any kind of electricity-based attack. And another slight negative point is that it's a bit cheap. I'm sorry, but dissolving hordes of gray goo that you can't fight at all is just going to be cheap. I'm sorry. It's just nature. But plus, it is utterly horrifying. It just objectively is, due to how there's no solid way to fight it. Like, at all. I mean, the EMPs, like I said, but if those don't work, or the heating, burning themselves up doesn't work, you're kind of screwed. I mean, sure, you have an article, but I wouldn't place your bets high on that one. Anyway, so that's the 5 snares in the Robot End of the World book, Revolt of Machines. It's kind of a middling book, honestly. Some of the snares are really good, some of them are just kind of meh. Like, it really does come down if you really want it, you know? And honestly, it's not the worst book ever. Not necessarily, at least. At least, it's not like the zombie snare where they repackage the same thing with slight variations by ripping off whatever zombie movie they watched that week. But yeah, it's not the cream of the crop necessarily, but it's not the bad pick, I'll say. Anyway, so that's the snares, and the next time we do this series, we will cover the 4th and final book of the End of the World line, Wrath of the Gods. Yeah? Hey, why don't you hit that sub button? You're gonna become a subscriber. Get to see my content quicker. Wouldn't that be nice? I bet so.